So 48 hours ago, I was getting off the plane here in New York coming from the fall meeting of the House of Bishops in Fairbanks, Alaska. I'm not the only person in this room who was there. Brother Randy Greaves from Order of Holy Cross is one of the two chaplains to the House of Bishops. And so he is at all of our House of Bishops meetings and was in Alaska. I guess the last time we saw each other was in the Morris Thompson Cultural Center on Wednesday morning. Randy and I ran into each other in Fairbanks, but here we are. It was an interesting trip. The practice of the House of Bishops is to have its fall meeting traveling around and meeting in different dioceses in the Episcopal Church. They'll never come to New York because we can't afford to have it in New York. So we wind up in a variety of different kind of places. And the Bishop of Alaska, Mark Latine, had asked some time ago if the House of Bishops could come to Alaska, and it was decided that we would do that. There was much excitement about this because almost none of us had ever been to Alaska before and wanted to do that, and so off we went to Fairbanks. Now, one of the things that we do when we go around to different dioceses is that we try to find a way while we are there to enter somewhat into the life and ministry of the church where we find it, and to learn more about and engage more deeply some of the spiritual, cultural justice issues that the people who live in that part of the church and the country are facing. And so when we went to Alaska, we had been told that we would be looking at issues of global warming and climate change in conversation, but particularly as those issues are landing very, very hard on the indigenous population of Native people throughout Alaska, and particularly in light of some looming ecological crises that are happening. Very specifically, for the Native villages along the Yukon River, they live or don't live based on the health of the salmon run and the caribou herd. And the caribou are doing okay, but the salmon population in the Yukon River has been cut in half. There are reasons for that. Some of it is poaching and other things that happen, but global warming is a huge cause of this reduction in the salmon population. And there's a lot of worry about that for the people in the native villages. And so it had been planned that on the 23rd, 1 week ago today, all the bishops who wanted to, and I couldn't imagine that some wouldn't want to, but some didn't, but that the bishops who wanted to would get into those tiny little itty-bitty planes and fly off to the native villages all along the Yukon River. If you look at Alaska, the state's kind of divided up by denomination. There's a big Roman Catholic chunk of the state, a big Presbyterian chunk of the state. The Episcopal chunk of the state is the oldest and one of the largest areas because a lot of Alaska was settled by Canadians. And when they came in, they followed the Yukon River from Canada into Alaska, and they brought the Anglican Church with them. And so they planted churches all along the river, and we have these little villages with the local churches. The populations of the villages are native people of different tribes, and all along the Yukon River. It was decided that last Saturday, we would get in the little planes, and we would go off in maybe 8 or 9 to the villages and meet the people, see their village, learn something about how they're living. They would give us a meal, and then about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, all the bishops would put on their rochets and shamir and gather and lead people in worship, and then stand by the river, and at the same time, all along the length of the Yukon River, the bishops of the Episcopal Church would bless the river. Now, I'm not sure that our blessing is going to bring the fish back, but it absolutely was intended, and I believe it did, convey to the native people, we get it, we understand, we're with you, we're praying for you, and we offer you our blessing and friendship as you walk this difficult road. So we did all these things. There's a point to all this. There's a reason why I'm telling you this. But let me tell you a little bit more about this visit up to Vinetai. Vinetai was the village I went to. It was one of only 2 of the villages. It was north of the Arctic Circle. So I now have a little pin that says Arctic Circle. We got in our tiny little plane, and the pilot, we took took off, and there's a lot of clouds, and we're inside the clouds. And the pilot said, don't worry, he said, we're going to pass Fort Yukon on our way north. And when we get to Fort Yukon, I'm going to go down below the clouds, and then we're going to just go very low, and I'm just going to do this visually from the air, and we're going to go under the clouds all the way up to Venati. So it was very cool. I mean, we kind of low to the ground. We saw a moose feeding by the side of the Yukon River. We didn't see it at first because our eyes weren't trained. The pilot said, well, let me circle around again. So we came around in a big circle, and he said, you can't just pass the moose without seeing it. And when we got back to the moose, he banked the plane way up so that if you looked out the windows on that side, you're looking straight down at the moose. And then eventually we got to the village. And we landed this tiny little plane on a gravel airstrip at Venati. There are no roads. There are some roads in Venati. There are no roads that go to Venati. And very few planes can get there, except for the smallest ones, because of this gravel airstrip. Not everything can land on that. So we landed there, and some of the native people met us at the airport. One guy had a pickup truck, and then the others were on ATVs, and they grabbed us and our luggage. We all had at least one bag that had our vestments in it, put us on the back of the ATVs or in the back of the pickup truck, and took us into, air quotes again, town. Venati has no town center. And when you see it from the air, what you see is a random scattering of houses just across the map, and then some little cluster of some communal buildings. Mostly people live in log cabins. Most of the log cabins have some deferred maintenance. And the people who live in Venati are very poor. And there's one store, I went into the store, and the bishop had said, look at the prices of food when you get into the store. So I did. There's a can, regular can, you know, that tall and that big around can, regular can, of cherry pie filling, $9. A regular sized bag of sugar, $22. And gasoline and diesel were going for around $9.50. Because there's no road into Venati. So everything that gets there has to go on those little planes. And so, you know, you can't take much. And so whatever you can take up there has to now have the cost of the flight added to it before you even do any kind of markup for retail. So, you know, as the people in the village said, we are subsistence people. And they didn't say that in any kind of, we're subsistence people. They said, we're subsistence people. And what we mean by that is we live off the land. The land is a cornucopia, and it keeps on feeding us. We live off the salmon, we live off the caribou, we live off the moose, we live off the berries, we live off what we can grow in that very short growing season that we get each year. They're proud of it, and they want to trade it. And I'm going to get back to that. So we go to the school, tiny school is smaller than this, but in pretty good shape. We get about 50 students. And we went from there to the community center, where we had caribou, which I recommend, it's very good. Although the next day, Randy can vouch for this, we had moosehead soup at a potlatch. And if your friend says, come to dinner next time, I want to give you my homemade moosehead soup, call me up, I have some things to tell you about that. So we got to eat some of the local foods, and that was great. So we get to the community center, we have the caribou. We took a box of food with us to give them as a gift, and they turned around and gave some of it back to us in lunch. And we talked to folks, and then Abraham Henry Sr., who is the chief in Venati, came and talked to us. He said, I'm 82 years old, I caught 100 fish this morning. And he talked a lot about what life is like there, but here's the kind of things he was saying. He says, you know, I'm the chief. So was my grandfather, my great-grandfather. And he went back, and he said, we've lived here all our lives. This land is ours, down to the Yukon River, and up and over, and everybody leaves us alone here. And he talked about their life and their culture and their traditions. A lot of talk about tradition, and about God. And all of it is tied to talk of the land. That they are tied to the land, their self-understanding comes from their life on that land, their living comes from the land, and everything that they understand about themselves and their community and how they live before God has to do with what it means to live on that land, be dependent on that land, and to take care of it. We will talk sometimes about indigenous cultures and the relationship with the land. I've never heard it like I've heard it from the mouths of the people who live in Venati. Not trying to make a point, just talking about themselves. And in every sentence, in everything that is said, it comes back again and again to the land that we live on, this land that we've been given. And so then from there, we went on, we had the service, we went down to the river, we blessed the boats, we blessed the river, we did all those things. But here was one of the things that I began to notice as I talked to people who lived in Venati. They will say that their life is hard, but it's not a hardship. One woman who walked me, I've been in the store, I didn't know where the church was, she walked me over, and as we walked, I said, it was like 40, and I said, in the dead of winter, people must not get out and about that much. She said, well, when it's 60 below. And then she stopped herself and said, well, once it goes past 40 below, you really can't tell the difference. She said, when it's 60 below, she said, the kids still go out and play, and we get out and about. She said, we've got the right clothes for it, and they're used to it. Okay. But as I looked around, I thought, this could be a pretty desolate place in January, February. But we walked along, and as I talked to her, and as I talked to others in the village, I went there with an assumption that if you live in Venati, it's because you've always lived there, you don't have any choices, you're impoverished. Probably if you've always lived in Venati, you're undereducated, and you don't have many options, and so there you are. And actually that turned out to be true for a lot of people. But this woman used to be a special education teacher in the Washington, D.C. school system for a while. She came from Venati, then she lived in Washington, D.C. She went back to Venati. And I talked to some guys who've been in the military. They were stationed in military bases around the lower 48 states. When they got out of their service, they went back to Venati. And so I began to sort of ask myself, if you had choices, why would Venati be your choice? Yes, it's very beautiful, but oh my God, it's a lot of hard work. And, it's 60 below. I know it only feels like 40 below, but sometimes it's 60 below. And then as we were in the church and we were praying, and as I listened to the chief talk about their life, and as I began to think about people who had been away and made the decision to come back to Venati, I thought about that wonderful line from the psalm written during the exile. How can I sing the Lord's song in a strange land? And that going back to the land that God has given them, being in that place where they knew who they were, in a place that they could call home, whether they had been born in Venati or chosen, that it was the place where they understood who they were before God and before the world, was something for which they were willing to make profound sacrifices. And they went back to Venati because Venati had become, or always was, their home. And as hard as it is, you hunt moose and then you eat the moose, and as hard as that life can be, it's better than making a decent living in Washington, D.C. So I thought about that a lot while we were up there. And it relates, to, for me, something about our conversation about sanctuary today, and what we're talking about. That the people of Venati have made a decision to stay there above the Arctic Circle and live under this significant privation. But the people of Venati also have done something else. Back some years ago, the federal government and the state government of Alaska looked and recognized that an enormous amount of land in Alaska was federally owned or was under the sovereignty of the tribes. And this was a barrier to development of resources. So they worked out a plan called the Alaska Native Settlement Claims Act with the tribes. And with all of the terrible history of the federal government working with tribes, this actually was okay as a plan. The tribes that entered into it, and I'm glad they did. What they said is, we're going to create a for-profit corporation with the tribes as the members. And the government will oversee the judicious development of resources in these federal lands in Alaska, and the tribes and the people in the tribes will be paid. They will receive proceeds, profit from this development, and everybody would be doing a whole lot better, and what you gave up in exchange for this was your sovereignty over the land. And so they ended the reservation system in Alaska, and the tribes lost sovereignty over the land, and in exchange, they got the benefits, the tangible benefits, of being part of this corporation. 2 villages refused to join. Venati and Arctic Village, the 2 most northern villages we went to. And they said, we will not give up the sovereignty. Maybe the courts determined that they had, in fact, de facto given up that sovereignty anyway. But when I found out I was going to Venati, I started reading everything I could about Venati, and I began coming up against this. And I asked the Bishop of Alaska about it, and he said, this is a true mouse that roared story. 2 villages with a combined population of about 300 people stood up against the federal government. And they sort of lost, but they stood up. And what they stood up for was their own sovereignty, their own freedom, their own independence on their own land. And that sense of who we are and the place where we are pervaded everything that I was hearing about what this land means spiritually and economically and emotionally for the people, what it meant for them, and what it meant for them to come back to Venati from places where life is frankly a whole lot easier. It was to live autonomous and free and independent and on their own, accountable to no one else. Now, when we look at, I began to think about this. Began to think about this value for the people of Venati in terms of my own life and in terms of the lives that we share. That virtue or value of independence and freedom before God and before the world is a profoundly high virtue for the people of the Arctic Circle. Thought about what that means for me. And as I began thinking about coming here today and our talk about sanctuary and our look at the justices and injustices of our immigration system in America, particularly about the draconian decisions that have been made right now around immigration in our country, I thought one of the consequences of an unfair, unjust immigration system in America is that it denies to so many people that independence, that autonomy, and that freedom to be who they are, where they are, that the people of Venati said, we'll starve to death in the Arctic before we give that up. And that expression, how can I sing the Lord's song in a strange land, is one that I gotta believe any undocumented person could understand as a refrain in their own life here in the lower 48. So that we're going to talk about sanctuary today, and Frank and Richard are going to specifically go into some depth in that area. But what we must be about as Americans, seems to me, is looking to make sure that all of the decisions that we make as people, especially as those decisions are made on behalf of or imposed upon other people, must be made to increase and further the possibility of every person to live in freedom. And for every person to know who they are, where they are, and to be able to sing the Lord's song wherever they are. That must be at the basis of what we do as a people in terms of immigration. And so right now in the midst of an immigration crisis, as we look to respond to that as a church, it seems to me that every decision that we make about how we advocate for people and protect people must always at its core be about enhancing and increasing and guaranteeing and preserving the personal autonomy and freedom of the people that we seek to help. That has consequences for us when we talk about sanctuary. Because often when we talk about providing shelter and protection for people, what we are doing is saying, on the hope that we may one day begin to get to a place where we can build and increase your freedom and autonomy, for a while, we're going to reduce it. And we're going to place you in a condition of dependency on us. And that is the spiritual danger and challenge for those of us who look to provide sanctuary and talk about sanctuary, is to recognize that at the heart of what we are doing is an act of power over other people. And when we find ourselves in places, at any place or time in our life, or anything that's going on, where we are making decisions that are an exercise of power over the lives of other people, that must be done in absolute humility. It must be done with prayer, in conversation, and with intention to listen very, very closely to the lives, the hearts, the desires, the dreams, and the needs of people who are caught between an immigration system and a sanctuary system, and what they really want to do is be free of both. That's what I brought back from Vietnam. Proud, independent, loving, strong, brave people who said, we'll turn down all the money, we'll turn it all down. Let us live in the land that God gave us, where we can sing the Lord's song and know who we are, where we are. Amen.
Amen.
Do you have time for one more 2-minute story? This has nothing to do with what I just preached, but it happened in Alaska, and I've been so terribly moved by it, all of it I want to tell you about. That one of the groups that went off to a village went to the village of Beaver, which is just below the Arctic Circle north of Fairbanks. And in that group of bishops was one of our bishops and her husband. And this bishop and her husband had been married for 35 years, and along the way she became a priest and she became a bishop. They'd never gotten baptized. It came up from time to time. She didn't press it, and he never wanted to, didn't think he really needed to. He went to church, participated in church, didn't get baptized. When they were in Beaver, a group of bishops was down by the Yukon River, and somehow it came up that this person had never been baptized. And the Bishop of Iowa turned to him and said, "Do you want to do this?" And he paused and said, "Yes." And the two of them knelt down on the bank of the Yukon River. And the other bishops formed a circle about them, except for the bishop who was married to him. And she hung back. She said, "I didn't want this to be about us." And she said, both of the two men were crying. And the bishop said, "Do you renounce Satan and all the spiritual forces of wickedness that rebel against God?" And walked him through the baptism questions and vows, the renunciation of evil, the affirmation of Christ, and then baptized him with that icy cold water. And when he finished, one of the other bishops said, "Let's confirm him." So they did. And the next morning, last Sunday, he received his first communion from the presiding Bishop Michael Curry at St. Matthew's Church in And the next day after that, the Bishop of Alaska, they have a confirmation cross that they use in Alaska. And they gave him the confirmation cross. And I thought, man, I want to get baptized. But anyway, holy things happened in a holy place. Please rise and let us affirm our faith in God, in Christ, in the words of the Nicene Creed, saying we believe in one God, the Father. Period. If people have things they'd like to ask me or tell me or to talk about, let me begin by making a couple observations that I'm bringing back from Alaska. One was that in that little village, the Church of the Good Shepherd, the walls were made of logs, and then everything else was finished with plywood and pressboard. Really, it was a church put together with the minimum that people could get their hands on and put together. But the altar, which was mostly made of pressed board, was covered in a beautiful deerskin frontal, covered with the most amazing native beadwork. And I thought, they knew what was important. And I thought about, when Jacob was running away from Esau, who was going to kill him, and he spent the night in the wilderness, and he put his head on a stone for a pillow, which I don't recommend. And then during the night, he had the vision of the angels going up and down the ladder, and he woke up in the morning and said, "Surely the Lord was in this place, and I didn't know it." And he took the rock, and he set it up, and he poured oil over it, and anointed it as an altar. And I thought, you know, maybe the story of Alaska is the story of setting up altars in the wilderness. And not long ago, that was our story. Later today, I'm going to Grace Church Hastings for the 200th anniversary. The weekend before I went to Alaska, I was at St. Thomas of Immigrant for their 250th, St. Peter's Peekskill for their 250th. I wrote a letter for Masood for the 200th at Tivoli, and suddenly we're doing a lot of anniversaries of churches. And I think about back when those churches were founded, we were setting up altars in the wilderness. And there's something amazingly hopeful and profound and prophetic about that. The second thing I brought back I want to share with you is that last Sunday I went to church at St. Matthew's in Fairbanks. Now St. Matthew's in Fairbanks is half the size of this sanctuary. But if they had a cathedral in Alaska, that would be it. And very small. But they have stained glass windows all around the wall. But it's not people from the Bible or saints. And I looked at one. It was a picture of a guy reading a newspaper. But when I read the little plaque next to it, it was commemorating the founding of the first library in Fairbanks, which was the reading room at St. Matthew's. Another window commemorated Archdeacon Hudson Stuck. It's an archdeacon of the Diocese of Alaska who was the first person to summit Denali Mountain. There was another window of Bishop Bill Gordon, the famous flying bishop of Alaska, who flew to the villages, brought medicines and health care, took care of folks all over the state. And there were other windows that depicted sending out missionaries to the villages. And I thought, all around in the windows, they're telling the story of the Diocese of Alaska. And I thought, when I go back to New York, I can go almost anywhere and see a picture of St. Luke. But where is our window that commemorates Francis, or Mary Wigorowski, or Deacon Herb Trimpe, or Deacon Vivian Syke? The people who labored among us, faithful, heroic people who are gone from us and could fall from memory. And I thought that's a wonderful thing, is to put the story of our scripture, the scripture of our lives, in front of the people every Sunday. That's a wonderful thing. So I just throw that out to you. Find a way to tell your own story in your churches so people know. What Joshua said when your children ask you what these stones mean, tell them that it was here that the Lord stretched out his mighty arm and brought us through in safety. Well, that happened in your church too. So, find a way to tell that story. So when the little ones ask you, what does this place mean? You say, this is the place where God worked the miracles and wonders, stretched out his mighty arm and shaped us and formed us into a people. This one will leave that. Now, any questions that you have for me or things you want to tell me? Well, I'm glad I had a couple things to say, otherwise we would have had nothing. All right, then we will proceed with the business meeting. Chuck is the chair of the Mid-Hudson Regional Council. And briefly, because what I'm going to ask is if there is other business to come before the Regional Council. Do we want to take a break before we do that, or roll on in? Roll on? Okay. Roll on, all right. Richard, I think you're up first.
Happy day? I'm going to do some broad presenting briefly, and then Frank will get into more of a specific presentation. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Richard Witt. I'm the Executive Director of Rural and Migrant Ministry, which is a ministry that's now 36 years old, that was created by the diocese. And we have our main offices located just outside of Poughkeepsie, and then we also have a center in Sullivan County. And I've been hanging my hat there at RMM now for 26 years. So, that be who I be. I want to do three things today. I want to go back to holding up something that our bishop was at the forefront of. I want to tell you about Miriam, and I wanted to tell you or introduce or reintroduce to you the menu of hope. Our bishop, along with 3 other bishops, including Bishop Fisher, Doug Fisher, formerly of Millbrook, took the lead a few weeks ago in inviting other bishops from around the country to issue a statement regarding DACA and the Dreamers. And that resulted in a full-page advertisement in the New York Times. And if you didn't have a chance to see this, I'm going to take the liberty of reading this to you. President Donald Trump and members of Congress, as bishops of the Episcopal Church, we implore you to not end the deferred action for childhood arrivals, known as DACA. To do so would endanger the lives of thousands upon thousands of young people and their families, and run contrary to the faith and moral traditions of our country. It is unfair to threaten the well-being of young people who arrive to our country as children through no choice of their own. Ending DACA without a similar replacement program will force these young people to face the future in this country with little access to education and employment, and ultimately could very well lead to sending them to countries where they did not grow up, have few support structures, may not even speak the language, and may be vulnerable to violence and persecution. Any of these scenarios we believe is cruel. The alternative for us as a country is to move forward, to celebrate and benefit from the presence of these dreamers, and to create a permanent process that enables them to remain and strengthen our country. In front of most of the Episcopal churches across the country is a sign that says, "The Episcopal Church welcomes you." We have this sign because we are followers of the way of Jesus of Nazareth, and our Christian tradition shares with many other faith bodies the absolute importance of welcoming the foreigner in our midst. Throughout the centuries, this tradition has brought us great wisdom and strength as the foreigner among us has become a part of the fabric of our country's life. In recent years, our congregations throughout the United States have witnessed firsthand the benefits that the young dreamers have brought to our community programs and life. We have been inspired by and gained much from their American spirit. President Trump and members of Congress, during the next 6 months, we urge you to find a permanent solution that enables these young people to remain a part of our country, which is also theirs. That was signed by 120 some bishops.
I need to add something here. It is true that I was part of the small number of bishops who helped to get this off the ground. But the initiating idea for this letter came from Richard Witt, who also created the original draft of the letter, although we'll do some edits, obviously, as 120 bishops got involved. But anyway, I appreciate, Richard, your acknowledging those of us who were part of making this happen, but you did not, in humility, acknowledge your own pivotal role in starting this.
Let me tell you why. I've had the blessing to work with many young people, one of whom is named Miriam. Miriam is 17 years old. She was born in Mexico. Her mother is a farm worker. And Miriam has grown up here since she was a very little girl in the United States. She has thrived to the point where she is in the top 5 in her high school class. She has become a leader in one of our youth groups. She has been a counselor in one of our day camps for younger children. And Miriam, on a regular basis now, has to go off to school while her mother goes to the immigration facility to find out whether her mother is going to be deported on the spot. So Miriam goes off to school not knowing whether she will come home from school that day and her mother will be gone. A few weeks ago, Miriam went with a group of people to meet with her congressperson. And she told the congressperson about what was going on for her. And the congressperson responded back to Miriam, "I'm sure you'll do fine without your mother." Now, I want to pause there for a moment because I don't know if this is easy for you, but I sometimes fall into this trap of thinking, well, it'll be okay, or this isn't that big of a deal, or what have you. But when I pause and I put myself back into my 16-year-old shoes, and I face the idea that my parent may be gone, and that I may never see my parent again, then I think we begin to feel the emotional and mental anguish that not just Miriam, but countless others are going through, of which we at RMM regularly face. We've already had a number of the parents of our young people be deported. We begin to sense that. And so while we've had these conversations about politicalness, this being a political issue, I would remind us that our starting point is from our faith perspective, our faith background, or as Bishop Curry said, being followers of Jesus of Nazareth. And that when we have that as our starting point, then the opportunities that arise for us in our congregations about how we can become in relationship broaden. Yes, there's been a lot of call for us to go and protest or be at rallies or to march, what have you. But there are so many other opportunities for us to bear witness to our faith and in turn to be in relationship with those about us, which is what led to the Menu of Hope. And we have copies here. We may notice you can download it from Rural Migrant Ministry website, but if you want a hard copy, we brought enough, I think, for one for each congregation. You can get more. And our goal with the Menu of Hope was to acknowledge that within our congregations, the discussion about immigration is tough. Right? I mean, I've talked to a number of you, and I've heard about the tension. I had one of my friends say that she preached about welcoming the foreigner. And after the service, some of the parishioners came up to her and said, "Why are you speaking against our president?" She didn't even mention the president. So I'm aware of the challenge facing us as we try to navigate through this. And so the Menu of Hope is about being what its title is, a menu of opportunities, a menu of steps that folks can take. There's a section there that we'll hear more from Frank about sanctuary. There's a section there about pastoral care. I had a colleague of mine talk about that what his church is really, really good at is liturgy. And he said, I don't think we can get involved in this, political stuff or advocacy or service sanctuary or what have you. And my response back to him was what? If your strength is liturgy, then use that. Be creative. I've learned through the years that we're pretty smart and creative. We're a pretty smart bunch here. We can figure out how to go down that liturgical path. which I would remind us, you know, the Latin root, the Latin word liturgia means honoring the public work of the people. So liturgy is the root. There's something there. All right, I'll say the word that many of us get a little nervous about. Fundraising. Is that 2 words? 1 word? When you get down to it, there are a lot of financial needs. Go back to Miriam for a second. If her mom gets deported, Miriam's going to have a lot of financial needs. There are financial needs for the groups that are trying to stand with Miriam, that are advocating on her behalf. And frankly, going back to Miriam's mother, Dulce, did you know that basically the practice is in the United States is that when you get deported, say back to Mexico, is that they take you to one of 5 towns, 7 towns, along the border somewhere, and they drop you off there. And they take your cell phone away from you. They take your money away from you. They in turn give you a check. There's no banks, but they give you a check. And there you are, maybe hundreds of miles away from where maybe you even came from, and maybe where you even came from 30-some years ago. So there are financial realities, and some of us are very good at raising funds. So there are all sorts of pathways here in the menu of hope for folks to take. So I hold that up to you. I'll stop there. This afternoon in the workshop, 2 things will happen in our workshop. One is we'll be happy to go through the menu of hope a little bit more. And then I'm very blessed that we have a wonderful young woman named Witt who's going to join me in that workshop. And Witt will tell her story, which Miriam has DACA. But Witt's not even entitled to DACA. And Witt right now is working, because she arrived to this country past the deadline for being eligible for DACA. Witt right now is in her 3rd year at John Jay College, where she's working on both her bachelor's and her master's degree at the same time, and lives in Newburgh. And so she's going to be sharing her story. So we'll have an opportunity to do both this afternoon. Right?
For those of you who don't know me, I'm Frank Alagna. I'm the priest in charge, one of the priests in charge at Holy Cross Santa Cruz Church in Kingston. And I'm really very grateful for this opportunity to speak with you about the emergence of sanctuary in Ulster County and the development of what has come to be known as the Ulster Immigrant Defense Network. I was thinking that last year at this time, somebody, if anybody used the word sanctuary with me, my immediate association and reference would have been to the Hunchback of Notre Dame and that particular story. And in some ways it seems like it has no connection with what we're dealing with right now, but on closer inspection, it is clear that the principles are very much present in the present drama. What we have is a gypsy who is at the mercy of a rabid crowd who are filled with their own ugliness and their own hatred. And a broken European man who is distinguished from everyone else by the amount of love that he carries in his heart for this woman. And he carries enough love to give his own life for her. After the last election, I think it was 2 weeks after that election, we had a vestry meeting. And in the course of our vestry meeting, one of our Latino vestry members shared a story. He said that his 9-year-old nephew came home from school yesterday and told his mother that he did not want to return to school tomorrow and would never again return to school. And when asked by his mother why, he shared with her that that day after school his peers cornered him and told him that he was not a real American, that soon he would be sent back to where he came from. The little boy was born in Kingston Hospital. Moving forward a bit further, I guess it was a few weeks later, I found myself in this position after our Latino Eucharist in the evening of spending some time with the folks who had come for Mass. And I was in this position in which I had to share with parents the urgency of their taking some time to fill out documents to see to it that if they did not come home from work on a given day, that they would have some say in to whom their children were entrusted. That was a very difficult moment. And I thought, to be placed in that moment, to have to say this to parents, for me anyhow, was a statement about not something just bad going on, or something poor political decisions might be being made. For me, it was a statement that in that moment I was facing the reality of evil. Because to put people in that position, put these parents and those children in that position, was to be about a work of evil. And there's a need for, one of our baptismal promises is that we will resist evil. We will oppose evil. I was then moved to ask the clergy of Kingston to join with me in making a request of the mayor that Kingston declare itself a sanctuary city. And very quickly, the majority of the clergy in Kingston signed on to that letter, and a copy of it is found in this little brochure that you have at your disposal. And after 2 public council hearings at the end of January, Kingston, in fact, took on this resolution and approved it. And there was movement in those conversations, public conversations, of some of the council members from one side to the other. And I was told after the fact that the second meeting was the largest ever in attendance meeting of the Common Council in Kingston. And a lot of people spoke on both sides of the issue. But the resolution passed, and basically what that means is that in a sanctuary city, the police are committed to not acting as agents of ICE. So if ICE is going to do its business, it's going to do its business without increasing its potential force in a given community. And there are pros and cons about a city declaring itself a sanctuary. In some way, it's lifting itself up as a target. And that, in fact, can be the case. And in the larger cities, that is, in fact, what's going on. Apparently, last week, there were significant targeted raids in Los Angeles. But I also experienced something on the live level of why it was so positive for Kingston to do this. Because the Latinos in our community began to realize that they are not as alone as they have experienced themselves to be amidst this sea of gringos. They are overwhelmed by the number of people that actually voiced care and concern for them. And that helps to establish bonds across places where there may not have been bridges before. And so there's a lot of good that comes from that, and it also makes the city a safer place because immigrants can be trusting of the local police in a way that maybe they would not feel as safe and as trusting without that kind of declaration. Having this happen, it then occurred to me that, well, if the city's going to declare itself a sanctuary, maybe the church in some way needs to incarnate this reality in its own bones. And so I asked the parish if we could put a shower in either in the church or in the parish hall. And they said sure, and with the help of the executive committee who funded the guts of the shower, the material you have to buy. And that's all it cost us, because somebody came forward and said they would do the construction work, somebody else came forward and said they would do the electrical work, somebody else came forward and said they would do the plumbing work, all pro bono. There's a lot of feeling, and then I went to get some flooring from the flooring place, and when he found out what it was for, he says, "You have it, it's yours, no cost." So there's a lot of feeling in the community about what's going on. And so I called a meeting of the clergy in early March to talk about how we might incarnate sanctuary. And I printed about 25 copies of an agenda. The day before that, at a FASO no-show, what do they call those, public town hall meeting. I was asked, because he wasn't there to say something, they asked me to say something. So I said something, and I just mentioned to the folks that we're putting a shower in at Holy Cross Santa Cruz, and that the following day, on Saturday, I was going to have a meeting with the clergy about making incarnate sanctuary through the churches and religious congregations. And I said, if you want to come and watch the clergy in action, I said, please come. Well, that Saturday afternoon, the hall at Holy Cross was filled with 125 people. And I said, wow, this is awesome. And my narrow kind of, what for me was a rather narrow kind of intention about putting in a shower and a living space in our church, and hopefully having that replicated in other congregations, I came to appreciate that sanctuary is much broader than that, and that we can be sanctuary in many ways. And in fact, there was energy and willingness on the part of many people to identify and give expression to the possibility of sanctuary. And so we began to talk about the first sanctuary not being space, concrete space, but the first sanctuary being our hearts. And everybody is capable, if moved by God's grace, to make their heart a sanctuary. And once the heart is a sanctuary, then the other things come much easier. Then it's possible to create spaces. And right now we have identified several congregations that are willing and ready and able to meet that very strategic request if and when it comes. But there are also, we've identified about 25 homes at this point, that families that have indicated willingness for their homes to be safe places for people who are in jeopardy in this way. And we had a couple of trainings for people who wanted to make their homes sanctuaries. And at the table, at the first training, what I asked people to do is just kind of voice why they wanted to do this. And some reflected that, well, we're human beings, this is what we have to do. This is part of our DNA. This is how we must respond to remain connected with our humanity. And then another group in the room spoke about the righteous at the time of the Holocaust. And they saw this as their opportunity to be as the righteous in this particular situation. And then others reflected upon specifically upon their Christian faith and how it moves them to want to do this. And very much as part of this training, we want to make it as guest and as user-friendly as possible. So we're designing a protocol that very much reflects where our guests are coming from, respects their privacy, respects their confidentiality, does not presume that we know what their needs are, and also respect what may be the given limits of a given household in terms of receiving a person. And in all the work that we're doing, it's a matter of making sure whatever we do, respecting what the bishop said, whatever we do is in dialogue with the people that we would be and are wanting to serve, so that it's not an imposition of gringos upon the rest, but rather something that evolves from the love of those who want to serve and the reality and the rights and the dignity of those who are being served. I kind of fast forwarded there for a moment into something specific, but we also, at that meeting at which there was an overflow crowd, people began to volunteer. I put out a sign-up sheet, and at the end of that, the meeting, somebody gave me all these pieces of paper with everybody's names and emails and telephone numbers, and I thought to myself, my God, what am I going to do with this? And as I was having that thought, somebody came up to me, pulled it out of my hand, and said, I'll take care of that. I didn't even know who the person was. Great. And that has been the response all along the way. People keep saying, I'll take care of that, I'll take care of that, I'll take care of that. And so we've now set up this Ulster Immigrant Defense Network, and it's being formed and forming itself and will take time to be fully formed. There's a schema of it on page 19. There's a coordinating committee and various folks. What we want to do, we have a group, for example, that works with school administrations and the healthcare people in schools to make sure that schools are on board with protecting the immigrant children in their schools. And most schools are very much attuned to this as they deal with their own in-house political reality. We also have people who are willing to keep people safer in their homes by, if people are feeling frightened, to go out in the street to help them with essential services like food shopping and the like, or transportation of their children to and from school. We also have a group of people who are willing to accompany people to ICE appointments and to court dates, so that people shouldn't feel alone in going into those terrifying experiences. An awful lot of this is, we obviously have to be public to do what we want to do, but we also, wherever possible, want to fly under the radar screen and not call attention to ourselves unless it's absolutely necessary. We also have training groups for a rapid response, should there be an ICE raid, so that to that environment will be called volunteers who will watch what's going on, hopefully make sure people's rights are being respected, that ICE agents are not entering into space without appropriate documentation, and that appropriate documentation is always a warrant signed by a federal judge and not by another ICE agent. So there are many things that can be done, and many people who are willing and ready to volunteer for this, to enable this and to support this. One of the things we've set up is the Ulster Immigrant Defense Fund. And in this little brochure, you can find ways to make contributions or direct contributions. The fund is set up to help anyone in need, in terms of whatever the needs may be in terms of their safety and well-being if they are at risk or in jeopardy. The fund is set up under the tax umbrella of Holy Cross Episcopal Church, but the fund is administered by a board that includes a member of Temple Emmanuel, a member of the Kingston Mosque, a member of Old Dutch Church in Kingston, a Latino member, a Latino representative from the community, and a member of the local business community. they have complete jurisdiction and say as to the distribution of the funds. One wonderful thing that has happened through this is that the faith communities in Kingston are drawing closer together as they attempt to together address and respond to this need and to this network that is being set up to help people in jeopardy. I just got a call yesterday from the Jewish congregation in Woodstock, who have put together a team to serve the network and its needs and relate to it and its needs. And they're planning an educational advocacy forum for sometime in December. And they hope that, an awful lot of this has to do with education, and making sure the narrative is the correct narrative and not the narrative that is being pushed down people's throats. The narrative that would have us see some immigrants as good immigrants and some as bad immigrants, some as criminals, some as innocent. We can fall into this trap in trying to support DACA, for example, because we hold up young people as innocent victims. The subscript is that their parents who brought them here may not be that innocent. Okay? The reality is we're all innocent, and criminality isn't any more rife among the immigrant population than it is among the population at large. So we want to make sure that people begin to reflect and appreciate and understand what is going on. I've taken it upon myself to meet with the leadership of various congregations. I did that with the Jewish congregation in Woodstock, with St. Gregory's in Woodstock, and after that each of those congregations said that they wanted to publicly affiliate with the network. And I told Matthew this morning that the Jewish congregation will be reaching out to them, St. Gregory, so that they might work together on these events that they are planning for December. So an awful lot of, you told me that I needed to cut my remarks short, and I will. But Richard cut his by 15 minutes. 5 more minutes, okay. Okay. So, in the face of this ugliness and the resisting of evil that I believe our Christian faith compels us to do, we can already see grace at work in ways that we might not even have expected. I wasn't thinking about greater interfaith community and cooperation, but this is the first time in Kingston, for example, that the imam has joined the Interfaith Council, and now is a regular participant in that. So those kinds of wonderful things are happening. Another thing, very kind of personal, because Holy Cross Santa Cruz, which is totally beyond off my radar screen, is that since we're beginning to do this, since January, we've added 20 new members to our congregation. Okay? And I'm not saying that that's the reason to go out and do it. That's not the reason we went out and did it. But when people see the church as alive in this way and as really responsive as possible to what is going on and about the business and what the gospel calls us to be about, the church becomes a very attractive place. So what I'd like to do with you, certainly at your invitation, if it would be helpful to you, we have this thing in all our congregations, and Richard alluded to it before, about congregants being in different places and how they think about and process and where they're willing to go with it. I'd be happy to meet with your church leadership, provide information that can be helpful. And I guess in all of this, my encouragement is always to any congregation to respond as you are able, okay, in a way that works for you and can be congruent with you. That you don't have to buy a package that is forced on you and then that you force on your people. But we can all respond, we all have that ability, and hopefully by our faith we have that mandate to respond in these kinds of ways. Okay?